The cracked sky and the empty streets of the sky was no longer blue. It was cracked like glass, painted in shades of ash and fire. Varelia, once a shining jewel among alien colonies, was now a broken planet. No more flying ships, no more trade stations. No more singing children on marble streets, only dust, silence. And the smell of burning metal remained. Sira held her younger sister, Niall, close as they walked through the ruins of what used to be the central market. Their stomachs growled louder than their voices, but neither of them complained anymore. They had used up their last words of hope days ago. Now they simply moved, one bare foot after another. Like shadows with bones, the buildings were torn apart. Their walls scorched and leaning. Colorful banners once danced from rooftops. Now they hung like dead snakes in the distance. A broken statue of the old chancellor lay in pieces, its head staring up at the dark sky. Even the sun seemed tired, hiding behind a veil of smoke. Sira was the older one, thin but tall, her silver skin marked with dirt and scratches. She was once a student of diplomacy, trained in multiple languages. Now, she only spoke in whispers to her sister, and even that felt too heavy. Niall was smaller, younger, but her wide eyes never stopped searching the world. She still believed food might fall from the sky if they prayed hard enough. They passed the remains of a bakery, the scent of old flour still clinging to the air. Niall paused, her eyes scanning the shelves inside. Empty, all empty. Sira gently pulled her away, her hand shaking but firm. "It's gone," she whispered, just like yesterday. The sisters had been walking for hours, their bodies weak, their lips cracked. Every step was a test of will, but hunger kept them going. They had tried to trade once, offering beads, family rings, anything they had saved. No one wanted old trinkets anymore, not when everyone was starving. No one even looked them in the... Then something changed. A smell floated through the dusty air. Warm and thick meat, cooked meat, real meat. Niall froze first, her head turning like a wild creature sensing danger or hope. Sira smelled it too, her legs suddenly full of energy again. They followed the scent through alleyways and half-collapsed buildings, closer, closer, their hearts racing now. Then, they saw it, a metal stall made from scrap, placed between two destroyed shops. A fire burned in a large barrel, and over it, thick slices of meat roasted slowly, dripping with fat. Behind the stall stood a human, tall, with rough clothes and sunburnt skin. His eyes were calm, like deep water, and his hands moved with care as he flipped the meat. Other aliens walked past. Some glanced, some grunted, but no one approached. Sara and Niall stood at the edge of the street, hidden in shadow, watching. Their mouths watered. Their legs trembled. Sara looked at her sister, then at the human again. No one was giving anything for free anymore. No food was free, not in this new world. And the sisters had nothing left to offer except themselves. Sira stepped forward, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Niall followed, afraid but trusting her sister. They reached the stall and dropped to their knees without speaking. Heads lowered, eyes shut, hands resting on the dirty stone. The human looked down at them, silent. For a moment, the world paused only. The fire crackled. Sira whispered, "Please." Her voice barely a sound. "We will do anything," Niall added, tears running down her cheeks. They didn't lift their heads. They didn't beg for kindness, just food, just survival. Their bodies were thin, their clothes torn, but their dignity had not yet died, and here they were, offering the last thing they could still give. But the human didn't laugh, didn't touch them, didn't walk away. He slowly crouched in front of them, holding two small cloth-wrapped bundles. He placed one in each of their hands and spoke gently. "Get up," he said, "and eat." The girls lifted their eyes slowly in disbelief. Warm tears rolled down their cheeks as their fingers unwrapped the cloth, revealing warm meat and bread. They stared for a moment, then ate like they had never eaten before, biting, chewing, crying, all at once. For the first time in many days, they felt human again, or whatever word still held meaning in a world like this. Sira looked at the human with wet eyes, and something flickered in her chest. Not love, not yet. But something even stronger, hope. The human with warm eyes, the food tasted like a dream. Sira couldn't believe it was real. Each bite warmed her frozen body, and Niall ate slower than usual, almost scared it would disappear if she finished it too fast. They sat quietly near the fire, their backs against the metal stall. Their eyes still on the human. He hadn't asked for payment. Hadn't looked at them like others did. He had only said, "Eat," and nothing more. The man's name was Cale. He was human, clearly from Earth, one of the few who had come to this ruined colony after the collapse. He wore old combat boots and a thick jacket, both patched and burned. A plasma knife hung from his belt, and a thick scar ran down his right cheek. But his eyes, they were different. They weren't hard like most soldiers. They were warm, like a campfire in winter. Eyes that had seen too much but still cared. Cale stirred the meat hanging above the fire, careful and calm. He didn't ask who the girls were or what they offered. He just gave them space, like they were equals. That silence spoke louder than 100 kind words. Later that evening, Cale noticed Niall trying to hide a cough. He pulled out a small tin from a crate and handed her a piece of something wrapped in paper. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shy honey drop. He replied, "Good for the throat." Niall looked at it like it was treasure, holding it with both hands. She didn't eat it. Not yet. She just stared at it, smiling softly for the first time in days. Sira stood and approached him slowly. "We can help," she said. "We don't want to be a burden." Cale looked at her and raised an eyebrow. "You two already survived more than most," he said. "That's not something weak people do." He nodded toward the stack of dirty trays beside the stall. "If you really want to help, rinse those in the barrel." And just like that, a silent agreement was made. No contracts, no debts, only hands, food, and fire shared by 3 broken souls. The girls worked while Cale cooked. Sarah wiped trays and sorted bowls. Niall swept dust from the stall floor with her hands. It wasn't much, but it was something, for the first time in months. They weren't invisible. The next day, other aliens returned to the ruined market. Drawn by the smell of meat, most of them ignored the 2 girls. Some whispered cruel things under their breath. "Pets aliens," one said, selling themselves for scraps. Another sneered, but Cale didn't flinch. He looked the whisperers in the eye, his hand resting casually on his plasma pistol. They walked away without saying more. When one tall alien dropped a broken tool on Cale's stall and asked for food in return, Cale frowned. "This won't even fix my boots," he said. But then Niall stepped forward, her voice soft but strong. "That's a precision rod from a plasma cutter," she said. "It's rare, even broken." Cale raised an eyebrow. Surprised. "You know tools?" Niall nodded. "My father was a builder. I watched him every day." Cale gave the tall alien a half portion and kept the rod. After the alien walked off, he looked at Niall. "You're smarter than most traders I've seen," he said. Niall smiled. A real smile, not a tired one. That night, Cale sat with them by the fire. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were heavy with truth. "I came here to get away from war," he said, staring into the flames. "Didn't expect to find another one. Not like this." Sira listened quietly, her arms around Niall. "Do you miss your world?" she asked softly. Cale was silent for a long time, then shook his head. "No," he said. "But I miss the people I lost. They didn't ask more. They didn't need to." Pain recognizes pain. And that night, without saying it out loud, anew, Bond formed not just between a human and two alien girls, but between survivors who understood loss and hunger and the slow rebuilding of trust. Sierra looked up at the cracked sky, still dark, still broken, but somehow, in that moment, it didn't feel so empty, because under that same sky, a human had given them warmth, not just with food, but with dignity. And as Niall finally unwrapped the honey drop and placed it on her tongue, her eyes closed, and she whispered, "Maybe tomorrow won't be so bad." The deal no one understood. Morning light spilled through the cracks of the ruined buildings. It wasn't bright, but it was better than darkness. Sierra woke up, wrapped in a thin old blanket Cale had handed her the night before. Niall was curled beside her, holding the honey tin close like a child with treasure. For the first time in many nights, they hadn't shivered in fear while sleeping. Cale was already up, grilling fresh meat over the fire. The scent of spices filled the empty street again. Sierra stood and stretched, her arms sore from scrubbing. Trays the day before, but that ache felt good, meant she had done something. Something real, something useful. "Morning," Cale said without looking back. "Water's in the blue drum if you're thirsty." Sierra nodded and gently woke Niall, who blinked like a kitten pulled from a dream. Together, they rinsed their faces and began to prepare the stall. No one had asked them to, but they wanted to. As customers arrived, the whispers returned. "She's still here? Must be doing something to earn it." But Sierra and Niall ignored them. They focused on wiping tables, organizing plates, and helping Cale trade meat for whatever he could get. Old power cells, scraps of cloth, even clean glass bottles. Cale never wasted a thing. Later that day, a tall, four-eyed merchant approached the stall. He slammed a box of metallic junk on the counter and said, "Meat." Cale raised one eyebrow and lifted the lid. Inside were broken wires and useless scrap, not worth even. "A bread crust?" Cale muttered. Before the merchant could argue, Niall stepped in. "This piece is a power coil from an old glide bike," she said, pointing, "and this circuit here. It's still live." Cale blinked and took a closer look. She was right, to components still worked. The merchant looked embarrassed, then angry. "Fine," he grumbled, "half portion." Cale served him without a word, but when the merchant left, he turned to Niall. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My father made bikes," she replied softly. "I helped when he was tired." Cale gave her a nod that meant more than a thank you. He didn't speak much, but he remembered everything. Later that evening, he sat by the fire with a small box and said, "Niall, this is yours." Inside were broken tools, wrenches, screws, wires, and a rusty soldering stick. "Fix what you can. Keep what works," he said. Niall's eyes sparkled brighter than the stars above. She clutched the box like a sacred gift and whispered, "I will." Meanwhile, Sierra cleaned the front tables when a strange creature approached. It was thin, long-legged, with skin like green, leather and eyes like pearls. He placed a crystal shard on the counter and said, "Meat." Cale glanced at the shard and nodded, but the creature didn't leave after the food was served. Instead, it leaned closer and asked, "What do they do for you?" While nodding at the girls, Cale didn't answer. The creature pressed again. "You must be enjoying yourself." That's when Sierra stepped between them, her voice cold and sharp. "We clean, we trade, we cook." She said nothing else. The creature smirked and left without another word. But the air around the stall stayed tense. Other aliens had questions too, but none asked out loud. They didn't understand this deal. Two starving girls, working for a human, but with no chains, no fear, and no shame. It didn't make sense. To them, later that night, Cale sat with the girls and spoke for the first time in hours. "You know, people don't believe in kindness anymore," he said. "They think everything must have a price." Sierra looked at the fire and nodded slowly. "I know," she whispered. "I used to think that too." Niall was playing with one of the tools from her box. her small hands careful and skilled. Kale took a breath and continued. You to remind me of someone I lost. He didn't say. Who? But they didn't ask. Some stories don't need to be told with words. They live in the way someone looks at you or hands you food when you're starving. From that night on, things began to change. Traders started treating the stall with more respect. Some even greeted Ciro and Niall by name. Others still whispered, still judged. But the girls no longer cared. They had work, they had food. They had fire, and above all, they had dignity. Kale never called them workers or servants. He simply said, "This is our stall." And to Ciro and Niall, those words meant everything, because in a broken world full of hunger and cruelty, someone had seen them not as things, but as people. Fire, blood, and loyalty. The wind had changed that night. It blew through the empty buildings like a whispering ghost. Carrying the scent of smoke and trouble, the market had grown larger in recent weeks. More stalls, more traders, and more watchers. But not all who came wanted peace. Some wanted what others had built. Without earning it, Kale's fire burned. Steady as always, meat sizzling quietly as he sharpened his knife. Ciro was scrubbing trays behind the stall. Niall sorting wires under the glow of a flickering lantern. They had found a rhythm together, each movement simple, shared, and silent. Until footsteps broke that rhythm, heavy ones, fast ones, and far too many. A group of 6 raiders walked into the market. Faces covered in dust masks, weapons slung. Across their backs, the traders nearby fell silent. Some backed away, some vanished into alleyways like smoke. The stall next to Kale's closed instantly, the owner pretending not to exist. But Kale did not move. He stood tall, hand resting near his belt, watching the men with eyes like cold steel. One of the raiders stepped forward, its voice loud and oily. "Well, well, the famous human cook," he said, smirking beneath his scarf. "We've heard you're feeding aliens without asking for much. That's generous." Kale didn't answer. Niall stopped sorting and stood beside Ciro, her hand trembling. Ciro gently reached for her sister's wrist and held it still. The raider's smirk faded. He pointed at the girls. "Give them to us," he said. "We'll feed them too, in our own way." The words made Niall flinch, and Ciro's jaw locked with fury. Kale's eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch. His hand moved slowly, lifting the flap beneath the cooking counter, revealing something long and metal. A plasma rifle, old but polished, earth-made and deadly. He raised it, clicked the safety off, and spoke only one word: "No." The silence was sharp, like a blade in the air. The lead raider laughed, but his eyes narrowed. "You'd keel over to starving girls." Kale didn't smile, didn't blink. "They're under my fire," he said. "You cross that line, you die." The second raider tried to move forward. Hand reaching for his blaster, Kale fired. One shot, straight to the man's leg. Plasma. Tearing through armor and flesh, the man screamed and dropped. The others jumped back in shock. Ciro grabbed Niall and pulled her behind the cooking crate, heart racing. The flames from the grill flared behind Kale like wings of fire. "You've got one chance," Kale said, voice calm but shaking the ground. "Leave now." The raiders hesitated, looking at their fallen companion. Then at Kale's steady aim, they turned and ran, dragging their injured man, their courage burnt by one warning shot. No one in the market made a sound until they disappeared into the ruins, swallowed by dust and shadows. Kale lowered the rifle, breathed slowly, and turned around. Niall ran to him and hugged him tight, crying silently into his coat. Ciro stood still, eyes wide not with fear, but awe. No one had ever stood up for them like that, not even their own kind. Kale gently patted Niall's head and looked at Ciro. "Are you both all right?" he asked. Ciro nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. Kale gave a tired smile, then back to work. "We've got mouths to feed." That night, the market glowed brighter. Other traders brought torches. Some brought water. A gruff alien named Rook, a scrap dealer, came to Kale's stall and placed a heavy wrench on the counter. "I'll keep watch," he said. "You've earned it." More followed. Silent gestures of respect: a knife, a bolt gun, a shield generator. They were saying the same thing in different ways. "We stand with you." Sierra and Niall worked beside Kale as always. But something had changed. Now, when others passed by, they bowed their heads instead of sneering when they served food. Customers said thank you, not hurry up. The girls weren't just survivors anymore. They were part of something, protected not by chains, but by loyalty. That night, under the cracked sky, Kale sat between the two girls. The fire was low, the stars above blinking quietly. He looked at them and said softly, "I don't know how long this peace will last." Sierra looked at him and replied, "Long enough to matter." Niall reached into her little toolbox and handed Kale a small object. It was a charm, built from scrap, shaped like a flame. "For luck," she said with a smile. Kale held it in his hand and nodded. It wasn't luck that had saved them. Tonight's was choice, courage, and something rarer than gold in a broken world. It was loyalty. The return of the elite. The sky above the market was no longer angry. The wind had softened, and for a brief moment, peace hung like mist in the air. But peace was a delicate thing in a world like this. It never stayed for long. The morning began like any other. Kale stirred the fire, preparing meat. Niall was laughing softly as she adjusted a small solar panel she had fixed herself. Sierra cleaned the tables out front, humming a tune she remembered from childhood. The stall had grown into more than just a place to eat. It was a place where broken people came to feel whole again. Then a strange sound echoed across the ruined street. A humming engine, low and smooth, not a trader's cart, not a raider's bike. Everyone stopped what they were doing. The engine's sound grew louder until a sleek hovercraft floated into view. Polished metal, black with golden trim, not a single scratch or dent. It was like watching a ghost from the old world glide into the bones of the new one. The hovercraft stopped in front of Kale's stall, and its doors hissed open. Sierra's eyes widened, and her body went still. From inside stepped a tall alien with robes of deep crimson. His horns were polished, his smile sharp and cold. It was Lord Varn, a noble from Sarah and Niall's past, once a powerful figure in the Varelian court. Now, somehow, still dressed like royalty while others starved in dirt. "Well," Varn said, his voice oily with amusement, "I never thought I'd find you two in a place like this." Sierra didn't respond, but Niall took a step behind Kale, her small hands clutching the back of his jacket. Varn's eyes moved to the human, inspecting him like a wild animal in a cage. "And you," he said slowly, "you must be the Earthman keeping them busy." Kale didn't blink. "They work," he said simply. "They help," Varn chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure they do." Then he clapped his hands twice, and a pair of armored guards stepped out from the hovercraft. "I've come to take back what's mine," Varn announced. "These girls used to serve in my house. Until they ran off, they didn't run." Kale said firmly, "They survived." Varn smiled wider, like a beast smelling blood. "I'm offering you a deal, human," he said, pulling out a golden box and setting it on the table. Inside were 5 thick gold bars, glimmering in the morning light. "This is more than enough for 2 slaves, wouldn't you say?" Sierra's fists clenched. Niall's breathing grew sharp. Kale didn't even look at the gold. "They're not for sale," he said. "Everything is for sale," Varn replied, voice cold. Kale leaned forward slightly, one hand slowly reaching beneath the stall. "Then maybe you're in the wrong market." The tension grew heavy, the air sharp. Varn's guards moved slightly, but Kale was faster. In one smooth motion, he set his plasma pistol on the counter. Cocked and glowing, his voice was soft, but each word hit like a hammer. "You brought gold," Kale said, "but I bring fire." The silence was louder than any scream. Traders watched from corners, breath held, hearts racing. Varn's smile faded at last, his pride cracked. "You'll regret this," he hissed, then turned to the girls. "You could have had silk again, real food, safety." Sarah stepped forward finally, her voice calm but sharp. "We found safety," she said, "and it's not with you." Varn said nothing more, only turned and stepped back into his craft. The doors closed with a hiss, and within seconds, the sleek ship vanished into the distance. Only the silence remained. Kale let out a long breath and picked up the gold box. He turned and dropped it into the fire. The flames roared as the metal hissed and melted. Sierra gasped. Niall's eyes widened. "That could have made you rich," Sierra said quietly. Kale looked at her, voice steady. "I'd rather be poor and clean than rich and filthy that night." No one laughed at the stall. No one whispered behind backs. Everyone had seen what happened. The human had turned down gold, had chosen two alien girls over power and luxury, and not out of pity, out of something stronger, respect. Niall hugged Kale from behind while he cleaned the grill. "Thank you," she whispered. Sierra stood beside them. No longer a servant, no longer a shadow. She was something new now, not a noble, not a beggar. Just a girl who had found her voice again, and in the fire's glow, the market around them no longer felt cold, because now it was built on something real. When the market burned, the night started quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt wrong. The stars blinked above the ruined city, and the air smelled of old metal and smoke that hadn't yet started. Sarah couldn't sleep. Something inside her chest felt heavy, like her heart was warning her without using words. She sat beside the dying fire, watching the shadows dance across the empty bowls. Niall was curled under a blanket, her hand still holding the little flame charm she had made for Kale. Kale himself was cleaning his old rifle, eyes sharp, movements slow and practiced. "I don't like this stillness," Sarah said. Barely a whisper. Kale didn't look up. "Neither do I," he replied. That was all they said before it happened. A scream tore through the air like a knife, not one scream, but many rising from the other side of the market. Then came the fire. It leaped up from behind the stalls, angry and fast, turning canvas and wood into orange chaos. Panic exploded. Traders ran in every direction, pulling carts, grabbing children. Shouting names into the smoke, Kale stood instantly, grabbing his rifle and shouting, "Wake, Niall, get her out." Sierra dropped to her knees, shook her sister awake. "Niall, run. We have to go." The girl blinked, confused, then saw the flames and stood up fast, grabbing her toolbox before anything else. As they ran toward the edge of the market, fire roared behind them. Explosions popped like fireworks fuel cells igniting old tech. Burning Kale turned back when he saw an old merchant trapped under a fallen beam. Without thinking, he dropped his weapon, ran into the fire, and lifted the beam with shaking arms. Sierra screamed after him, but he didn't stop. He pulled the merchant out, burned his own arm in the process, but didn't make a sound. Niall helped drag a lost child from behind a barrel, her tiny hands covering his mouth to keep him from crying. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes, choking lungs, but still, they didn't stop. The girls moved like light in the darkness, pulling, guiding, carrying others to safety. People who once ignored them now clung to their arms. In that fire, every wall between caste and race melted. Everyone was just a survivor now. By morning, the market was black. Nothing remained but ashes, twisted metal and smoke still rising from the ground like steam. Sierra's robe was singed, her arms scraped. Niall had a bruise on her cheek and burns on her fingers. Kale stood with his burned arm wrapped in cloth. His rifle slung across his back, the food stall gone, the grill melted. Everything they had built together turned to dust. Sira stood in silence, her eyes on the spot where their fire used to burn. Niall stood beside her, holding Kale's uninjured hand. Kale looked around at the other traders. Workers, even former thieves, all gathered, dirty and shaken. No one spoke for a long time. Then a young alien stepped forward, carrying a plank of wood and a hammer. He dropped it at Kale's feet and said, "You fed my daughter when I had nothing." He nodded and walked away. Another came forward with a bent iron rod. "You protected my wife when the raiders came." Then another, this time with nails. Then someone else, with paint, a tarp, a bottle of water. Soon, a pile grew in front of Kale. Tools, parts, anything that could be used to build again. And then someone said, "We rebuild together." Kale looked at the girls, his voice low. "Do we start again?" Sira nodded, tired but firm. "Yes." Niall wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "We build it better." So they began, right there in the ashes, with blistered hands and blackened clothes. They cleared the burned space, hammered new boards, fixed bent nails, shaped a new stall from broken things. And this time, they weren't alone. Half the market joined them strength, laughter, food, stories, and songs. Even the old merchant Kale had saved offered spices from a hidden crate. "Flavor makes hope," he said with a wink. By sunset, a new frame stood tall. Not perfect, not fancy but strong. The fire crackled again, and the smell of food returned. It wasn't just a stall anymore. It was a symbol of survival, of defiance, of family. And the girls, once starving, now stood proud beside it. Not as beggars, not as guests, but as builders of a new beginning. The new beginning, the first full sunrise after the fire, was unlike any before. Soft golden light spilled over the rebuilt market, touching new wooden stalls and fresh canvas sheets. Ash still lingered on the ground, but life had returned. It wasn't. The old market was something stronger, something born from smoke and courage. The new food stall stood proud in the center, not because of how it looked, but because of what it meant. It had been built with bruised hands and broken tools, with kindness instead of currency, and the fire crackled once again. Not to destroy, but to feed. Kale stirred the meat quietly, his burned arm now wrapped in cleaner cloth. He said little, but his presence spoke volumes. He had lost everything twice and still chose to stay. He was no longer just a cook or a survivor. He had become the heart of the market. Sira stood beside him, her robe patched with care, her eyes sharper than ever. She handled the trade now, speaking with authority, watching every deal like a leader. Traders came to her not just for food, but for advice. Some even called her Lady Flame, a name she once would have hated. Now she carried it with pride. Niall had changed too. She now had a small workbench behind the stall, where she repaired, scavenged tools, and designed new gadgets. Her fingers were fast, her eyes sparkled with purpose. Children came to watch her work, and she would always smile and hand them something small to fix. "Try it yourself," she'd say. "You're stronger than you think." Word of their survival had spread beyond the ruins. Other humans came, drawn by the story of the Earthman who stood his ground. Some came to trade, others to learn. One human even knelt beside Kale and asked to become his apprentice. Kale didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Instead, he handed the young man a cloth and said, "Clean the fire pit first, then we'll talk." That's how things worked here now. No titles, no orders, no debt, only effort, respect, and shared survival. One evening, as the market buzzed with new life, a little alien girl tugged on Sira's sleeve, Her face was smudged, her clothes too big. "Are you the lady who was hungry?" she asked softly. Sira kneeled and smiled. "I was," she said. "Now I'm full." "Why?" the girl asked, blinking. Sira pointed to the fire, to Kale, to Niall, and then to the others around them. "Because someone fed me, and I never forgot how it felt." The girl hugged her without warning, and Sira held her tight. That moment became something no fire could destroy. It was the first seed of healing in a galaxy that had almost given up. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a small celebration began. There were no grand speeches, no royal guests, just simple music, claps, laughter, and warm bowls passed from hand to hand. Kale sat beside the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. Sira leaned on his shoulder for a moment. "Do you miss the old world?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "The old world never had this." Niall danced clumsily with two children, laughing without care. The market wasn't just surviving, it was living, a beacon in the dark, lit not by technology or gold, but by the small, stubborn spark of humanity, a spark that had caught flame in the heart of an alien world. Kale glanced at the melted charm Niall had made for him, now strung around his neck on a leather cord. He touched it gently, smiled, and whispered, "Still burning, and there, under the same cracked sky that once watched their suffering, the fire of a new beginning warmed every heart that chose to believe again, not in kings or credits, but in each other."